Ryan.
Hi, Savanah.
What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about queer-coded animated characters. We might be a little bit late for Pride Month, depending on how this month works out. But of course, Pride is every day. As I've watched a lot of videos about corporate pride and how Target has like a shirt that says like 24/7, 365 in gay writing,
Yeah.
Comic Sans and Rainbow.
Yeah.
The gay language. And that's how it is. Thanks, Target, for telling me.
Yes, I'm sure you saw the rainbow suit.
I did see the rainbow suit that they had. And that was actually going to be the original episode for this, but I mean, there's a lot of content about that, so
yeah,
go look at it. There's so much.
Yeah.
A myriad of things. It's all wonderful. And I just kind of want to make a statement here that I am for corporate pride.
Okay. Do you want to expand on that at all?
I just find that it does something. A lot of people get angry about it. And are disrupted by corporate pride, and I think that's okay. I know it's for greedy reasons, but we got to start somewhere.
Yeah. I feel a little differently, I think, on this subject. That's not what the podcast is about today.
No, it's not.
But yes, happy Pride, everybody. We will be having some links to some organizations to check out if you want to give donations to anybody. Make sure you support some local queer businesses in your area. As mentioned previously in other podcasts, we do have a Etsy shop with handmade jewelry and eventually vintage items. We do have a Pride collection of jewelry, so if you want to check that out and support us, definitely see links in our bio. And as always, thank you to our patrons and our sponsors. So yes, today we are talking about queer-coded animated characters. So a quick little primer on what queer coding is. This is the definition from Wikipedia. Queer coding is the subtextual coding of a character in media as queer. Though such a character's sexual identity may not be explicitly confirmed within their respective work, a character might be coded as queer through the use of traits, stereotypes recognizable to the audience. Such traits are greatly varied, but traits of exaggerated masculinity and femininity, vanity, and hypersexuality are frequent.
So breaking that down a little bit is kind of, I hate to use this word, but breaking it down to like the barest sense would just be like your perception of what you think is queer and what you see. I guess kind of like your gaydar, but with media. And it's not explicitly said in the text, but you just kind of pick it up on little subtle cues. We did an episode recently on Raya and the Last Dragon. I guess that's a couple months ago now. But we talked about how Raya and the villain in that movie are queer-coded because one of them is like a cat lady and she has an undercut. And those are two things that are kind of associated with the lesbian community.
Yeah, and so that kind of brings us to the coding portion of queer coding, which I'm excited that I get to bring something up semiotics related again in a podcast episode after we heard about my love of semiotics in our Pepe episode. But coding in semiotics, a code is a set of conventions or subcodes currently in use to communicate meaning. The most common is one spoken language, but the term can also be used to refer to any narrative form. Consider the color scheme of an image, meaning like red equals danger. So kind of like Ryan explained, when you see certain images or certain characteristics that somebody maybe has, say, in a TV show, like your brain identifies that as being queer in this instance.
Yeah, I'd say that's the long and straight of it. So we're going to talk about some of our favorite queer-coded characters, some of them more explicit than not, and we're going to kind of break it down why we feel like it's good representation, bad representation, why we vibe and like these characters, and go from there, I guess.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. All right, so Ryan, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Okay, guys. We could do a whole episode about this, but I could not live with myself if I didn't mention Yuri and Victor. Yuri Katsuki and Victor Nikiforov. I'm representing him here on my vintage Hot Topic shirt from 2016. So it's a Japanese sports anime, first and foremost, about figure skating. And if you haven't watched it by now, you probably have deliberately not watched it, I would say. Just because I think everyone talks about the praise on how it's a great sports anime, as well as the greatest love story of our time. It was directed by Yamamoto, and the original scripts were written by Kubo, which I believe most people credit to. I remember in the old Tumblr days, after I would watch an episode, I'd go on Tumblr and I'd see what everyone was saying, see all the art from that episode, and people would talk to Sensei Kubo like they could talk to her and will things into existence, even though she was just the original scriptwriter and not the director. Many things in this are coded, but nothing is explicit in Yuri on Ice. Savanah, you've seen the show, right?
Yes, I have.
So the word gay, the word queer is never used. And in fact, in the dub version of Yuri on Ice, they're more explicit in their language than in the Japanese version. And there could be a lot of reasons for that, but I just kind of want to go over why this is so queer-coded. It is explicit in the text that Yuri, who is performing Eros, which is his own masculine sexuality, finds it more comfortable to perform his Eros routine as a female. So that plays a lot with gender bending and gender fluidity, which is not really expecting in what you would think this would be as like a figure skating gay anime, which I think is really cool. This 2016 anime does a lot of things that is unique for what it is. You take a lot of sports animes like Free, which are pretty much just fan service, meaning that they put the queer coding there just to sate girls like me who like to see the queer romance. And of course, the girls who really like yaoi, which are kind of a different thing. And we talk about that in our first episode ever, right? Second episode ever. So if you want to know more about that and why girls find gay guys so sexy, maybe check that out. So it's just fascinating to me how nuanced this piece of media is for the time. Savanah, you've watched it. What are your takeaway from it? Like, do you feel like the queerness of the show is diminished, that it's not explicit?
No, I don't think so. I think it definitely like comes off very clearly without being explicit. Although I do recall watching it and feeling like, are they just building this tension because they know the audience will like it? I didn't really know anything about like the creators behind it at the time. So that was definitely like in my mind as I was watching it, albeit I still did like enjoy watching it. Mm-hmm. And I liked seeing this like unsaid thing like play out amongst the characters.
I really think that this show benefits from just being coded and not it being explicit, because it's just a fact of life. These characters are queer. It's not like the main thing. These characters are in their 20s. They know who they are. It's not some kind of coming of age story that we've seen a million times. And I love coming of age gay stories, don't get me wrong. But this is something different that we really haven't seen a lot portrayed in media, where just the queerness is there and it's well done and it's there for queer audiences to pick up upon. So much to the fact that some people do defend that Yuri and Victor are just bros, but
they haven't seen the show.
Some people do defend that. Some people see the iconic kiss scene between Yuri and Victor, and I have it up here on the outline if you want to refresh your mind, Savanah, and we'll post it up here. But some people say that they're not kissing there. Some people say that. There's like a 0.001% that they're not kissing there, and it was frustrating for some people to see that. And I mean, I believe that they're kissing. Everyone believes that they're kissing. The creator says that they're kissing. The creator says they're engaged, but some people still choose to believe that Victor and Yuri are bros.
Yeah. I think that says something to maybe the people in that community who are not accepting of that, unfortunately. But I feel like in my mind of remembering watching the show, what I appreciated was that it didn't feel like uncomfortable or like stereotyping in any kinds of way. Like I think to like Ouran High School Host Club with like Hikaru and Karu, like they're like forbidden love that they have, which is forbidden for other reasons potentially in the show. But that I think feels more so like maybe would play on like stereotypes or things like that. And I never really felt that way in Yuri on Ice. It just felt like a romance which was what I really liked.
And they both play a lot on gender, and it's not just about being gay and yaoi. I mean, I don't know what they need. Do they need Yuri to bend over for Victor? I don't know. Apparently that's what they're asking for.
Apparently.
I will tell you, there was a lot of problematic behavior in the community. A lot of people believing that, like, Yuri was submissive and he would be in that submissive position, and there were fights in the community, and that's just what happens, unfortunately. And it's just nobody's business, and nothing is black and white in relationships, and people need to accept that Yuri is his own seductive masculine force in his own right.
Yes.
I'll get off my soapbox now. I do want to bring up the question, though. Even this isn't technically coded, right? Because the author, the director, has stated that they are gay. So is it still considered coding when the director says that it's true?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this brings up a good point, because especially if they say it, like, after the fact, I think it feels like initially maybe it was coded, and then something happened that led to them making a statement. Maybe because they were like, oh, this seems like it will be widely accepted, so I will say something. Or it seems like potentially this is what people want, so I will say something. So it feels like maybe because it was not, like, said in any kind of way. And I don't really know how they would say it without just making it just obviously that's, like, what the show is only about or something. Like, I don't know. I don't know how they would maybe market it in a certain way or something to make it feel like from the outright, like, it's not coded. This is just who the characters are, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Japan does have a very closeted society, and the fact remains is that Yuri on Ice couldn't show if it was more explicit. If they were more explicit in the male romance content, they would have probably gotten a later time slot in the day, which would have led to less viewership, just like it would in the United States. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty large contributor to the content and the overt content and queer content that we get because of those laws. Now, that's just me guessing, but I think it's a pretty good guess.
Yeah. So do you feel like in this instance, like, it is queer coded, or do you feel like it's, like, more of a gray area?
I'm a firm believer in death of the author, meaning that the text stands on its own, and we don't really... Now, lots of instances where this, like, is very complicated, but I really do believe that the text belongs to the reader. And so I'm choosing to take this text and read it from my own point of view and say that these characters are coded and they are queer in my head, and that's what I take away from it.
Yeah. And I think I, specifically in this back to, like, if it is or is not coded, I appreciate not only did they not, like, fall into stereotypes, but it didn't feel, like, sexualized in an uncomfortable way. Mm-hmm. I think that also, like, plays a big role into it just feeling more, like, natural, I guess, of a show and a situation for these characters to be in.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. Yuri and Victor aren't the only pairing here as well. We have Odebek, and we have Yuri-O, which is kind of Yuri's rival, and they're both two different people from Yuri and Victor. No one is kind of the same, and you do see a lot of the same kind of effeminate, skinny, gay representation in media, which is quite frustrating. And they were all so different character-wise. Mm-hmm. You have the gay who feels sad and defeated and alone, and you have the one that is a confident sex symbol, and you have one that's angry and prepubescent, not grown up yet, and still kind of in that feminine body, and then you have kind of just like the stoic, masculine presenting gay, which I feel like is really refreshing.
Yeah. Shall we move on to our next couple pairing? So to kind of go along with this, I think in a way that, like, kind of complements Yuri and Victor in some ways, I'm going to choose to talk about Korra and Asami from The Legend of Korra. So Legend of Korra is would you consider a spin-off series? Mm-hmm. Part 2? Yeah. It's a spin-off series of Avatar: The Last Airbender on Nickelodeon. The show aired originally from 2012 to 2014 with a brief hiatus in the middle there. And then after the show ended, it did continue with a comic book series as well. This show was created again by Brian Conexo and Michael Dante DiMartino, who also made Avatar: The Last Airbender. And the show follows Korra, the new Avatar after Aang's death. Essentially, she's a new reincarnation. And pretty much at the end of the show, spoiler alert, if you have not watched it. I guess we probably should have maybe given, I guess you didn't really do any spoilers for Yuri on Ice, but spoiler alert now for Legend of Korra. So at the end of the show, it is implied that Korra and Asami, another female character in the show, do get together. This is seen in a very brief glimpse at the very end where they walk together hand in hand into the spirit realm. This is after, throughout the series, seeing them each date other men. They both dated the same man at different times in the show, and were almost kind of perceived as having a rivalry in the beginning towards each other, but then becoming friends and appearing to develop a relationship. And in this particular instance, I also feel like it's kind of not necessarily queer-coded, but is still kind of queer-coded. I feel like if you're just looking at the TV show, I feel like it is. If you look at the comics, which I'll get into the comics in a second, I don't necessarily feel like it is. But if you're just purely looking at the show and what stereotypes they might be employing, or just the moment of walking hand in hand, you could assume that that's a relationship. I'm sure there are many people who argue that it did not look like a relationship, that they were just friends.
Me. I would 100% argue that. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I've always had a lot of thoughts on this one. And I don't know how much I should blame on the showrunners and creators, or I should just blame Nickelodeon. I have no idea how early they wanted to implement this. I feel like it has not been fully disclosed yet, and it's just extremely frustrating to me. I think I would be more inclined to believe the show creators that they had intended this all along. But I was blindsided. I did not see it coming at all. I watched the ending. I didn't see any kind of queer coding at all. And I'm not the kind of person that looks out for that kind of thing. I always have been. And it just didn't strike me. And maybe it's because I've never really liked Asami as a character, and I never really liked Korra as a character until later in life, that I just didn't even bother to look for it. But even upon rewatch, I struggled to find the coding that they say that they put there. But here I am with my magnifying glass looking it over, and I still don't believe it, and I don't buy it, and I think this is where queer coding has gone horribly wrong, and I think they betrayed us.
Well, I feel like I had maybe a slightly different experience than you did, Ryan, because when there was a hiatus break in this show, I stopped watching it. And then when it came back on TV, I wasn't watching it because I didn't have cable at the time. I wasn't living at home. And so I wasn't able to finally finish the series until it came back. It was on Netflix or something. And I was finally able to watch the last season of the show. And I had already had the unfortunate happening of the ending spoiled for me.
Right.
But knowing what was going to happen inevitably with these characters, specifically in that last season where Korra and Asami start to really develop their friendship, I could see where that was going. And it kind of made sense how you could see they both had their failed relationships, maybe with men. It's kind of unclear. It's not clear if they're supposed to be bisexual or just lesbians. That it's not obvious. But I could see how maybe there could have been some stereotypes in play originally, just with Korra being more of a tomboy, I guess you could say, and Asami being into fast cars and stuff like that. But it's not anything as obvious as I would say as in Raya and the Last Dragon. If you were gonna compare it to something like that, that has very clear symbols. I will also say that Brian Connected has confirmed suspicions that Nickelodeon did prevent something more overt happening in the show. He said, "We approached the network, and while they were supportive, there was a limit to how far we could go with it." So I don't know if that means that they wanted originally to do something earlier. The actresses who voiced Korra and Asami, they both also said that they had conversations with the creators prior to doing the voice acting for it or anything, and that they knew that that's where it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was never any inclination that it was just fans who wanted that to happen, which it seems like there was maybe some subsect of people who fans who would have wanted that to happen through fan fiction at the time, I'm sure, before that there was any inclinations. I did feel, though, it like if you only look at the first couple of seasons, like you would have no idea that was going to happen for sure. But I like it. I'm glad that is the direction that this show got into, especially because after like seeing like everything play out with Mako, I was like, I'm done with him. Like, he can go. We like Korra and Asami together here, and it seems like overall it has been accepted, even if that's not what your opinion is, Ryan. I did find this article about it, and I will insert this graph here, which I was just really glad that there was a graph of this. But this is a graph of Korrasami fan fiction works published on the website Archive of Our Own by month. So there was a very big spike in fanfic right after the finale, and then it kind of dwindled. But then there was another resurgence of a lot of fanfics written about them together after the show was put on Netflix this past year. Mm-hmm. So it seems like in general people really like it. And as I kind of mentioned in the comics, which I haven't read the comics, but I'd really like to now after I watched a YouTube video about them. But the comics really like go into their whole relationship. They like come out to their parents. We learn spoilers. Are you okay with spoilers of the comics?
Yes, I'm not no spoilers.
No, you don't want the spoilers?
I don't want spoilers,
okay.
No.
Okay, well, I won't say the spoilers.
Unless they're very minor.
It's about other characters.
No, I don't want spoilers.
Okay. All right, so no spoilers here since Ryan doesn't want to be spoiled. But let's just say there's things in it that make it feel, again, more comfortable, I guess you could say.
That's all fine and well. I accept it now. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that Korrasami stands in The Legend of Korra. I don't think you can walk away from that show and be definitively clear that Korra and Asami are together.
This is true.
I just don't think it stands alone at all.
No, not just by watching the show. Apart from the creators confirming it, Nickelodeon has also now accepted it, almost as if they've accepted it all along, with that infamous tweet that came out, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago, with Korra and SpongeBob and someone else, I don't remember who. Yeah, this list of characters that they claimed were gay this whole time. So they've officially come around to it, and a lot of people credit Korra and Asami's relationship being one of the first gay relationships on a children's TV show that allowed for that to be more widely accepted in other TV shows for kids.
I think we're in a better world for it having happened. It's just as a person who is always looking for representation in her media is just incredibly frustrated by the lack of care by the network that was put in. And even Korra in general, I mean, in their disregard for her story and her mental illness that I think could have been really great to have on network television just to be put on Nickelodeon's website. It didn't even air on cable. So Savanah, you actually have no excuse for not watching it.
I don't know. I think, I was just going to say, I think that the creators, from what I've gleaned in my research, it seems like they wanted to do it justice. And I have a feeling that probably goes just for other things in the show as well, that just could have been better or expanded upon more if they had just probably been given more of a budget and just more creative license to do what they wanted. But they were probably pretty limited with Nickelodeon and what they were offering.
Probably. We can only speculate.
Well, we don't have to because there's the comics, so we can read now and see what else they wanted. Anyways, I think we can move on.
So next on my list for favorite queer-coded characters in animation is Scar from Disney's The Lion King. So I think the common knowledge nowadays is that pretty much all of the Disney Renaissance villains and before were all queer-coded in some kind of capacity to symbolize evil. And so we had a moment where we were like, gay equals evil. That's probably not good. But it's kind of been reverse reclaimed, and now it's kind of a sense of pride, kind of with horror and how that happened, where there's a lot of queer analysis that we had with horror and like Dracula and Frankenstein and traditional monsters. So that's kind of where we are now, where Disney villains being queer coded is like a sense of pride, and it's like they belong with us now. Scar, definitely one of my favorites, voice narrated by Jeremy Irons, who lends a very dramatic sense and weight to Scar that we haven't really seen in Disney before, just because he is a seasoned dramatic actor, and I feel like he does a marvelous job. In The Lion King, it is notable that queer coding is used as both in very traditional ways, where it's like we have queer coded the villain, he is talking eccentrically, he is hand flapping, and he is referencing feminine objects. I know a lot of people bring up the line where he's talking about curtsying, but there's also a joke used by Timon about dressing up in drag and doing the hula, which is another way that people love to use queer humor, is just for some fast jokes. So is Scar on your top tier list for queer Disney villains, or is he kind of at the bottom for you?
I think that he's probably more at the bottom, but I think that just has to do more with, like, my feelings on The Lion King as compared to other Disney movies.
What? Really?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, The Lion King is good, but, like, I don't know. It's not, like, in my top 5.
I'm just... Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I also think that, like, there's other characters. I mean, I think that the queer coding of Scar is interesting. I think, like, something to be said, too, about, like, the queer coding potentially of Timon and Pumbaa together, too, is something interesting to look at as well.
They're just bros.
Are they? Bros who eat bugs together?
They're just bros who eat bugs together. Although...
Who raise a child together. So, an adoptive child.
The reason why I chose Scar, and I was considering Hades, I was considering the obvious pick of Ursula, and I chose Scar because I think it's so clear in the animated version what they thought they could do to symbolize Scar as a villain versus in the live action version, where we see Scar and all of his flamboyance is just drained away and then given to Timon, played by an actual queer person. And Timon is that typical, like, meerkat, slight, like, very flamboyant type of character that's given even more weight when played by an actual gay person, which I thought was interesting to think about at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have not seen the live action Lion King, so I cannot speak to that. But I feel like I could imagine definitely how it would be lacking something with Scar just not being in the way that he was. And I think it definitely makes sense to me why so many people have reclaimed, like, the villains of Disney as, like, queer icons, essentially, just because I think there's something about, like, being powerful, like, in that way, and just, like, doing whatever you want, mm-hmm. regardless, and being, like, dramatic in that sense, I guess. I like that. I like those kinds of characters in, like, a step removed. Like, once I step back after the stereotypes and seeing the things that are problematic of equating gay people to being evil, then I can be like, okay, I like this. And I did watch a YouTube video that was talking about, like, there was, I believe, like, it was like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and another one where it was, like, actually intentional. Like, it was, like, actually thought out to queer code the characters, versus with something like The Lion King. I wonder how much of that was, like, intentional versus just, like, this is what we think of evil people as mm-hmm. being, like, we associate these things with bad, so this is how we'll create our villain, versus being like, we're doing something. Like, for instance, like, I was watching this video that was talking about Beauty and the Beast, and mm-hmm. how the creator of Beauty and the Beast was very specifically trying to talk about, like, queer identity and, like, the AIDS crisis at mm-hmm. the time, and was very overtly, like, even, I guess not overtly, subtly trying to, like, get that into the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or even Ursula being coded after Divine, the drag queen, and the music for The Little Mermaid was made before the movie, and so one of the writers for the music is openly gay, mm-hmm. And he died of AIDS. And he, like, I choose to believe that Ursula was pretty intentional and not so much coded.
Yeah.
But Scar, on the other hand, there's not a lot of evidence there. But I think overall, I'm happy to have Scar the way he is and the way he's portrayed. And he definitely makes some of my top villains. I think I just like how subtle and manipulative he is, as opposed to some other overt villains. And Jafar makes me uncomfortable. And we really haven't had any good Disney villains, I think, past Mother Gothel. And it's just such a shame. We've had we have Tafiti, but not.
Yeah. I feel like my top would probably be Hades, just because I love his humor. All right, so now we will transition to doing our Q&A. Once again, as always, if you have a question you would like Ryan and I to answer, please leave it as a comment down below. You can DM us on Instagram, wherever it is you would like to tell us your question.
So we have our little bingo roller, and we have some numbers associated with questions. I'm going to go ahead and roll it for your ASMR pleasure. I'm going to roll another one. There we go. 1.
All right, number 1. What was the hardest podcast to make?
I got to think back and reflect. Probably the Pepe one. I mean, we decided to do a 2-parter on the Pepe one just because there was a lot of research to go into it. And if I could redo the Pepe one, I probably would.
Yeah, I think probably the Pepe one too, just because we tried to cover like so much stuff in it. That made it pretty difficult. The only other one I would think of would maybe be like Unborn, perhaps, because that one too I feel like could have had like a lot of different stuff to talk about. And personally, I think that one was like the most difficult for me to like just like keep my cool and like not get upset.
Unplanned, you did it again.
Oh, dang it. Yeah, unplanned. If you did not know, I can never remember the name of the movie either.
So that was also a challenge, yeah.
Yes. All right, so back to our queer-coded characters. So along the same line of queer villains, for my next pick, we are going to go with him from the Powerpuff Girls. The character him, as stated, was from the Powerpuff Girls, airing from 1998 to 2003. That's just the original Powerpuff Girls, not the reboot. So he was originally created by Craig McCracken, and he is kind of a demonic being in the universe who tries to create plans for world domination, pretty much. And imagine like a cross between like the devil and a lobster with some like high boots involved.
I thought high fashion clown demon.
I could see that. High fashion clown demon. that I can get that for sure. This particular description I saw on an article described him as Satan. Oh, no, Santa. A fusion of Santa, a lobster, and a gothic drag queen. So there you go. Some images if you are not familiar with what he looks like. His voice is like very specific to his character. He has this very unsettling falsetto voice, but it doesn't sound like your traditional falsetto. Something about it just sounds like off. And I've tried to put my finger exactly on what it is. It's like it has some kind of like reverb or like
supersonic.
Echo. Yeah. But then he'll like immediately go into like a demonic rage, kind of almost like Hades-esque, where he has this like scary deep voice where he's like yelling. And he is also like notably actually characterized after another queer-coded villain, which I'd learned for the first time in doing this research. He is supposed to be inspired by the leader of the Blue Meanies from the Beatles' Yellow Submarine cartoon that came out years ago, and I'll throw up a picture of them side by side, but they do have some similar looks to them a little bit, and apparently they do have kind of similar voices. This particular villain, I feel like his queer coding definitely comes out through like his voice that he has, his mannerisms. Like he does lots of like poses with his leg that could be appearing to be like very feminine, and again with his falsetto voice. And something that I think is kind of interesting with him is like he's definitely like the most fearsome villain in the whole show. Like, I actually started rewatching the Powerpuff Girls recently, and to this day, he still kind of strikes fear into my heart. Like, when was the last time you heard him, Ryan? Like, a clip?
And I'm gonna say, like, pretty recently. I feel like he's always been something that's stuck around in the popular zeitgeist. But yeah, he's really scary. And whenever I see cosplays of him at conventions, they're always very tall, and I stay away.
Yeah, it's creepy, for sure. And I remember being afraid of him as a child, definitely. Whereas Scar, I'm not sure I was afraid of Scar. But this guy I was afraid of, for sure, whenever he was in a Powerpuff Girls episode. And I think kind of similarly as mentioned with Scar, he's been kind of reclaimed through the stereotypes that have been of him by the queer community. Here's a little quote that I pulled from a blog talking about him. This person said that they had an awareness that it's problematic how he's been portrayed, but also they have accepted him and that now he is major goals, which honestly I can agree. I feel like, again, just something about being like having so much power and like control that even like the Powerpuff Girls I feel like can't even ever really stop him. Like, it's usually, it seems more so by some like luck, really, that they're able to do that, and the fact that like nobody can touch him, really.
I agree. He's totally scary, totally problematic.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just something about him that is so captivating that we've mentioned, and there's just that reclamation of villains that does feel really powerful. And I definitely want to explore it more, especially with queer horror maybe in the future and when spooky time comes around.
Yes, we'd love to do that for spooky time.
My next pick, and it was a little bit of a begrudging pick, I'll be honest with you. I was kind of torn between choosing Shigo from Kim Possible and Elsa. And I landed on Elsa because she's a bit more iconic, despite how iconic Shigo is. And I have really grown to like her. When the original Frozen came out in 2013, I didn't like it. I wasn't really a Frozen fan. It just seemed like some kind of too self-aware Disney movie, maybe a little bit too polished, too like aware of tropes and two princesses instead of one. I wasn't really sold on Let It Go as a song at the time, and there was just something about the story that was uninteresting to me. But then the 2019 film Frozen 2 came out, and I was blown away. Best film ever. I completely love Elsa now. She is in my mind, the text belongs to me as the reader, lesbian horse girl with beautiful flowing hair. So I just have really latched on to Frozen 2 and its message about colonialism and about how Elsa still doesn't really have a love interest to speak of. And maybe that is something there about the queer community latching on to Elsa because she has no one, that in itself is a little bit bad. She's allowed to not have someone and be whatever she is. But a lot of people have chosen to take Elsa as a queer icon. And for good reason, right? There's Let It Go. I mean, there's nothing like this girl who has been hidden away her own life in her little room, locked up, too afraid to let herself go because she has magical ice powers, and a whole song about it. And then in the second movie, there's something else calling to her, and she still isn't really her true self as royalty. Sure, she's out in the open now, but now she has to accept truly her own powers. So I think that that's something there too about how you can come out but still be kind of uncomfortable in maybe the position that you're in and not really fully come to terms with what it is to be out. And I think Elsa's just a really complicated character, and there's nothing really quite like her in media right now.
Yeah, I would say so. I have not seen Frozen 2, but based off of your description of what just happened, I would agree. I can't really think of anybody that like has that same journey. I feel like that's even just interesting, like as a storyline for kids to see somebody like go through a process like that, regardless of what it is that they're overcoming. That in itself seems like it'd be like a really great thing for kids to see play out on the screen. When I first saw the first Frozen, I did not immediately identify Elsa as being queer necessarily. I can see, like, looking back on it now, like, just this idea of her being, like, locked away, not being able to be her true self, like, that obviously can read that way. But at the time, I did not see it in that sense. And if anything, I feel like it's almost like teetering a little bit on like, why can't it just be overt? I guess. So why can't we just have that at this point in time? But I know why we can't, because of society.
Yeah, because of society. And the fact that she's played by Idina Menzel too, who is, you know, Alphaba kind of in the canon. She's kind of everybody's Alphaba. She's what we listen to. And she's a villain, Alphaba is. She's the Wicked Witch of the West, which has also kind of been reclaimed in the queer community. And that Elsa originally started out as the villain in Frozen in the first initial drafts. So there's that kind of initial villain coding as well. There's just a whole slew of stuff going on with Elsa that I really didn't pick up on the first reading. And I still don't really like Frozen 1. I still don't. But I like it a bit more now. And I like Elsa as a character more now. And I really appreciate Frozen for what it is, about a story about sisterhood. And not being complacent and finding who you are in kind of a different way than it's been told before. And I like Kristoff too. I like the straight hetero romance as well, and how it's portrayed there.
I think I have also seen like a kind of counterpoint. At least I saw like a very brief interview with Idina Menzel, which she was saying how for her, or to Disney, I don't know, Elsa doesn't have a love interest to show that like the relationships don't have to be like the most important thing as well. Which I think is a good narrative to have in these types of kids stories. Although I think it would be great if Disney did use this as an opportunity to like have actual representation rather than just alluded to anything in the movie.
It would be. I don't know if we'll get a Frozen 3. It wouldn't surprise me if we got a Frozen 3. I don't know if Frozen 2 had the same crack in it that made 2-year-olds just pop off. It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't really feel like it's sticking. And Frozen 2 has really mixed receptions, I find. I think a lot of people don't really like the muddiness of the film. But I really loved it, and I'm going to make Savanah watch it when November rolls around, because that's the Thanksgiving movie now. Everyone's going to watch it in Thanksgiving. And, yeah.
Okay. Not sure I understand why it has anything to do with Thanksgiving, but...
it's a movie about colonialism.
Oh, okay. See, and this is why I guess I need to watch it, because I don't understand.
And imperialization. And
I see.
It's very good.
Okay. We will watch it for Thanksgiving.
But yeah, that's why I chose Elsa over... I honestly very much struggled to figure out any kind of queer female-coded animated character, and that says a lot. So that's why I landed on Elsa.
Moving on to my final pick, I chose Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot. So I actually came to this pick in kind of an interesting way, because again, when I was trying to pick my third one, I wanted to pick somebody who was maybe like different from the other people that we had already had on our list in some way, and also just maybe somebody that I hadn't necessarily viewed as being queer coded when I originally watched it. And so I googled like queer coded animated characters, and then she came up, and I actually could not find very many like articles written about this instance or YouTube videos, but I did find quite a few Reddit threads about it, which I found to be interesting. So if you don't know, My Life as a Teenage Robot was a Nickelodeon show that aired from 2003 to 2005. It was created by Rob Renzetti, who also worked on Powerpuff Girls as well. And Jenny, or XJ9, as she's also referred to, she is a robot who is state-of-the-art. She is a protector of Earth while also being a teenage girl who goes to high school and has all the trials and tribulations that go along with that. There was a certain amount of time that she was kind of like locked away at home before she was allowed to go out and about into the world and go to high school. So Jenny has been kind of claimed by the trans community as being a representation that people have latched onto. They have cited some different moments of the show, which I'll pop up here. There's moments where she is arguing with her mom about being called like the chosen name that she has wanted for herself. She wants to be called Jenny versus her like robot name that her mom gave her. And her mom like shows pictures of her of when she like used to look different, and now she has a different appearance. And her mother is telling her to respect the body that she has, and then she says, what's there to respect? Nobody in their right mind would want a body like mine, just feeling kind of disassociated from the body that she's had. And then in other instances in the show, just being really grateful when her mom refers to her as her daughter versus like as a robot. So again, this is something that I didn't pick up on when I watched the show back in the day. Did you ever pick up on any of that, Ryan?
No, but I definitely heard of this before. I think in like kind of Tumblr little things, you know, like during Pride Month, people would be like, characters you didn't know were queer, and like little scrollies.
It seems like there's many people on different like trans subreddits that specifically like to talk about like characters and things like that that have really latched onto Jenny and really view her as an icon. And I've read like very many very sweet posts from people really identifying with her a lot, and it was pretty heartwarming to read people's like interactions with this show. There was a moment in the show that people really thought could have been like a signifier that she was trans, because there's like a scene where it looked like you could have seen the trans flag in the background, but the creator has said that there was no intentional transgender subtext in the show. However, he doesn't believe that doesn't mean the subtext couldn't be there. And he said that art is open to the audience interpretation, and he's pleased that Jenny's struggles resonate with some members of the transgender community. So again, this is an instance where the creator has not, like, he said that that's not what they did, but kind of in the sense of like death of the author, like he's happy that people are able to have this experience with the show.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. I'm really glad that people are latching on to Jenny like that, and it makes me want to go rewatch a couple of episodes for sure.
I know, I do too. I think it might be on Amazon Prime.
I'm sure it's on Paramount Plus.
Probably. Maybe we should do an episode on Paramount Plus.
Drag Race is exclusive to Paramount Plus, so
a lot of things are.
I'll be watching it there. Yeah, excited to go back and rewatch and see the subtext there. I think that is really a fun pick. I'm surprised you hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah, I missed it somewhere on the Tumblr days. To wrap this up a little bit, I thought it might be interesting for some people maybe who might be like new to queer coding as a concept to kind of maybe bring up some of the reasons why like queer coding exists in general. As you mentioned, Ryan, like in a lot of other countries, to have queer characters is not the most marketable or will not be accepted. So that's definitely a major reason why these types of characters would not be seen in other movies. Here in the United States, I think that there's definitely still an argument for that in modern times of just the marketability, especially in like children's media, and what unfortunately some parents may not be willing to show their children. Also, historically, there was the Hays Code, which was also known as the Motion Picture Production Code from 1934 to 1968, which was essentially like a rule book that movies had to follow, one of which being that they weren't allowed to show sex perversion in things, which was essentially anything gay. They weren't allowed. And so to kind of go around that led to a lot of people like having these queer coded characters that could be identifiable without being too much against this code of conduct that they were supposed to follow.
I think it's really fun to look, not fun, but it is, I guess it is fun, to look back on the movies and see how they were changed, especially with a lot of early horror films, and see how the not MPAA, that's what we have now. Yeah. How the Hays Code responded to that, and tried to manipulate the film and the creators. So let us know if you're interested in that, because I would love to go back and take a look at that. Another important discussion to talk and have about queer coding is queer coding versus queer baiting. Baiting is intentionally placing the subtext there with no intention to follow through on that subtext. So there's a lot of arguments about that, on what's queer baiting and what's not. A lot of people would call Yuri on Ice queer baiting because it's not in the text, and some people think that there's not enough follow-up. So it's kind of a fine line on what's considered queer baiting, and it's kind of up to the reader, I would argue.
Yeah, I think I have the bigger issue with queer baiting when like somebody from like the cast just like says something out of the blue, like you mentioned in Ryan the Last Dragon. There's been like celebrities recently in the media accused of this as well, just like pretending or just saying things like out of their ass or just saying things that seem like they're just, maybe the network told them to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I know Teen Wolf, there was a really big controversy with that. I didn't watch Teen Wolf, so I'm not super familiar, but I know two of like the main male leads were always like hanging on each other because I knew that people really liked it, but it never followed through. So
yeah, or I think probably like Supernatural could probably fall into that as well.
We know that that's complicated and it's supposedly canon.
People also have been accused, like I mentioned, celebrities, like I know Billie Eilish recently has been accused of basically doing that to her audience as well. So that I feel like is like the thing that bugs me the most in that particular situation. I do think like in today's context, thinking about queer coding, or I guess actually thinking the past context, I feel like it's a little bit more excusable. Just to think in the context in which like movies had to be made, like they only had so many options, although like it still doesn't excuse like horribly stereotypical representations of people that just ended up being damaging in the long run. And I think today for something to be just queer coded or queer baited without any thought behind it, one just seems very limiting with like whatever media that is that they are creating, but again could just in turn become like damaging ultimately, because it's one, either like saying like, oh, we can exploit this thing that people are into, but two, like we still don't find it acceptable, so we can't say it out loud.
I don't know what you have here by will representation save us. But I'm really happy and excited to hear what you have to say by this final wrap-up point, Savanah. Will representation save us?
The answer might surprise you. So this kind of like leads me to the point, I guess, of thinking about like queer coded versus just like having queer characters. Like the difference between having a queer coded character versus just like actual representation. And I think that I would assume we can agree that having actual representation is better than having just the queer coded character, unless maybe it's something like Yuri on Ice where it kind of like benefits from like not having anything necessarily overt because it just like normalizes it. But I will say that even with having like representation, like that's not the end all be all. Like just having representation of people like queer people or people of color or anything like that doesn't fix our problems that we have. And I think that right now we're kind of in an age where that's like going on a lot. Like this person's queer and that person's queer and Target loves queer people and like we have no problems, and like that's not true. Which is why I feel like representation will not save us in the end. I mean, it's helpful and it's good and it helps like especially young people when they're like developing and figuring themselves out, but ultimately it's not gonna be what helps us get out of this labyrinth of suffering, Ryan.
Yeah, no, probably not. But I think it's a step.
Yeah.
I think that it's a step. And I think right now I would rather see explicit representation of queer people versus just coding and subtext. Even though I do prefer the subtext in Yuri on Ice or in Celeste. When we talked about that, we talked about how it's kind of coded that Celeste is trans, and it wasn't made explicit until the creator said so, essentially, and put a trans flag in the DLC. So I think overall I would prefer explicit. Just like kind of right now, I would prefer explicit race representation. I don't think aracial is really acceptable anymore. This blind casting trend that we see, I think is a little bit of a weird spot.
Any final thoughts, Ryan?
I don't think I have any other thoughts. What are your favorite queer-coded characters out there, you viewers?
Happy Pride Month. It's at the end now, but I hope you had a good Pride Month. And if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure that you give us a like if you watched us on YouTube, subscribe, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
Share us, follow our Instagram. Like we said, we have an Etsy shop open, so if you want to support us, we really look forward to hearing from you.
Bye.
Bye.